Welcome back to the channel. My name is Brian Kingsbury. Today we're going to do another Brian Reads the News segment. This one brought to us by MSN.com. Today's article is titled 12 Useless School Rules That Only Made Sense in the 70s. Remember when school rules actually made sense for their time? Well, mostly. Looking back at the 1970s classroom regulations, some of these rules seem downright ridiculous by today's standards. From dress codes that would make modern kids laugh to safety measures that weren't very safe at all, here's a nostalgic look at some school rules that definitely wouldn't fly in today's educational system. Rule number 1, no calculators allowed. Teachers insisted we'd never have a calculator in our pockets. Learn to do it by hand, they said, because you won't always have a machine to do it for you. Now every smartphone has a calculator, and most jobs require computer literacy rather than manual calculation skills. Those hours spent memorizing multiplication tables seem almost quaint now. Rule number 2, girls must wear skirts or dresses. Until the mid-1970s, many schools required girls to wear skirts or dresses, even in freezing weather. Pants were considered inappropriate for girls despite being more practical and comfortable. The rule finally changed after parents protested about their daughters having to wear skirts during the winter months. Rule number 3, smoking areas for students. Believe it or not, many high schools had designated smoking areas for students in the 1970s. With parent permission, students aged 16 and up could smoke during breaks. Some schools even had indoor smoking lounges. The practice continued until research about secondhand smoke emerged in the late 1970s. Rule number 4, left-handed writing restrictions. Some teachers still forced left-handed students to write with their right hands, believing left-handedness was a bad habit that needed correcting. Although this practice declined by the 1970s, it persisted in some schools. The psychological impact of this forced change is now well documented, but it was considered normal back then. Rule number 5, mandatory skirt length checks. Girls had to kneel on the floor while teachers measured the distance between their skirt hem and the floor. The rule stated skirts couldn't be more than 2 inches above the knee when kneeling. Despite the rising popularity of shorter skirts in fashion, this humiliating practice was common throughout the decade. Rule number 6, no hair below the collar for boys. Despite the popularity of long hair in the 1970s, many schools maintained strict rules about boys' hair length. Hair couldn't touch the shirt collar or cover the ears. Some schools even sent boys home with notes requiring haircuts before they could return to class. Rule number 7, duck and cover drills. These Cold War era drills continued well into the 1970s. Students were instructed to hide under their desks in case of nuclear attack, as if a wooden desk would protect anyone from an atomic bomb. Looking back, it seems more like a way to give kids false sense of security. Rule number 8, corporal punishment. Many schools still used paddles for discipline in the 1970s. The principal's office often had a wooden paddle prominently displayed as a deterrent. Parents typically signed permission slips allowing this form of punishment, which wouldn't be tolerated in most schools today. Rule number 9, no water bottles in class. Drinking water was only allowed at water fountains during breaks. The idea of carrying water bottles would have seemed absurd. Teachers worried students would use them to pass notes or create disturbances. You had to raise your hand and ask for permission to get a drink, even on the hottest days. Rule number 10, gender-separated classes. Physical education wasn't the only separated class. Many schools divided students by gender for subjects like home economics, girls only, and shop class, boys only. This practice reinforced gender stereotypes and limited learning opportunities for both sexes. Rule number 11, typewriter-only papers. Many teachers only accepted typed papers, but computers weren't available. Students had to use manual typewriters, and one mistake meant retyping the entire page. Some schools even required students to take typing classes, insisting it was a crucial life skill, though they never imagined we'd all be typing on phones. And finally, rule number 12, no phones in school. The only phone available was the payphone in the hallway, and you needed a note from a teacher to use it. In emergencies, you had to use the office phone under strict supervision. Today's parents would be horrified at the lack of communication options, but it was normal back then. Alright, there you have it, 12 useless school rules that only made sense in the 70s. If you guys enjoyed this video, please take a second to give it a like. You can do that now. And if you really enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing to the channel.